Welcome to the Bradley J. Show. Imagine you're flying in an airplane like you've done so many times before. You settle in, you're, heading up, everything's cool, and bam, the side of the plane tears off. Stuff comes flying out. If you don't have your seatbelt on, you get sucked out of the airplane and plummet 16,000 feet to your death. Well, it could happen. And a lot of that happened to some folks recently, and Micah, my main man, Micah Engber, is going to talk about it because he's an aviation expert and involved. Are you a co-host or involved with Airplane Geeks podcast? You're a co-host, right?
I'm a co-host. I've been on the last, I've been on and off for a while, but I've been on the last 4 or 5 episodes.
Good. And I tell you, Micah lives, breathes, knows everything about planes and aviation and getting flight deals. And his friend he runs with a wild crowd. His friend Brian is so insane that he flew how many miles just so he would fly to South Africa and back, not even get out of the airport. He would fly to Hong Kong and back, never get out of the airport, just for the miles so he could become a super lifetime member, mega card-holding dude and get business class all the time. No, not all of that I just said is correct, but pretty much most of it is correct. He may have gotten out of the airport in South Africa, but some airports he didn't even leave the airport. He just wanted the miles.
Yeah, he flew to Singapore. He was going for his lifetime 1K status with United, and we do a podcast all about it called "The Journey Is the Reward." And he flew to Singapore several times, where he would take the flight out. The plane would turn around. He'd get back on the plane and fly back to L.A. and just to get his miles. And he was doing that in usually first class, so he was pretty comfortable. But yeah, he did that a few times because the flights were comparatively inexpensive, and he would get a lot of miles that way.
So how did he get comparatively inexpensive first class? We'll talk about that later. Sorry, I'm getting off the track. This Alaska Airlines flight where part of the plane came off and exposed some passengers to the outside is pretty interesting. Why don't you lay down what happened? Tell me what happened.
Well, first let me say Alaska Airlines is actually it's a very safe airline, a very comfortable airline, a very well-known, well-respected airline, and one of the best in the country. This was not an issue that was Alaska's fault, as far as we can tell at this point. But they were flying on a Boeing 737-9 MAX. It was one of the bigger 737 MAXs. And what happens with the 737 MAX, aircraft can be configured to hold different amounts of people. In some of the lower cost airlines, they'll squeeze as many people in there as they possibly can. And with Alaska, they don't squeeze quite as many, but when you have more people on, you need to have more exit doors. So the fuselage, that's the long tube that everybody sits in, of the 737 9 is designed so that if it has a high number of people inside, they put in extra doors on hinges and everything. But those doors are expensive. So on the aircraft that are going to be configured for a lower number of people, like Alaska and United, the only two American carriers that fly the 737 MAX 9, they put in what's known as a door plug. Now, they've been using door plugs for years on the regular 737, the 737-900, on the 757. On the inside, you wouldn't even see that it was a door plug. It just looks like a window. And
what's
you
a
have
door
no
plug?
idea. Instead of putting in a door, they put in this plug that is bolted into the fuselage, and because they're making the fuselage with all the openings, rather than putting in the whole door with the hinge, they put in what's known as a door plug that just looks like a side of the fuselage from the inside. On the outside, you can sort of see it because there's a slight gap between the windows, and it's just behind the wing. And it would be an extra exit if the aircraft were configured with a larger number of passengers.
I see. So if they had more passengers, needed another exit, they would have a door and not just this thing where the door would go.
Right, exactly. So Alaska, didn't buy any aircraft with regular doors. They don't need them, and it's certainly much less expensive to put in the plug, and it's a standard item that's used. But it looks like one of two things happened. there was either a quality control issue through Boeing and Spirit Aerosystems, the subcontractor that makes the fuselages for Boeing, or the bolts failed. There was a metallurgical problem that made the bolts fail. It's looking more and more like there was a quality control issue, probably at Spirit Aerosystems, the company that makes the fuselages for Boeing. All the 737-9 MAXs have been grounded by the FAA until they are thoroughly inspected and they can figure out what determined the problem.
So do you think they already tested the bolts and found them to be metallurgically sound?
I'm guessing, and I am only guessing at this point, that yes, they probably were perfectly fine, that they just weren't installed correctly. Boeing, in 1997, I believe, McDonnell Douglas and Boeing merged. And in that merger, what happened was McDonnell Douglas bought Boeing, but rather than keeping the name McDonnell Douglas, they changed the name or maintained the name Boeing. McDonnell Douglas was always known to be a accounting firm. It was always bottom line dollars. And Boeing was always an engineering firm, meaning making the top line best aircraft you can. And since McDonnell Douglas took over Boeing, Boeing has become, it's really McDonnell Douglas by another name.
So you're saying they, in your opinion, now focus more on the McDonnell Douglas bottom line than the Boeing excellence?
Yes. What people are, the way it's described is that McDonnell Douglas was run by accountants and Boeing was run by engineers. And
I see.
Boeing is now run by the McDonnell Douglas accountants.
Oh, no. So should we be worried about Boeing in general? Safety?
I don't think so. I think that this will, just like other issues have been resolved, this will be resolved. The FAA has determined they're going to be doing closer inspections with Boeing. They're not going to give Boeing as much autonomy as they once had, and they will figure out what caused this. And again, the 737-900, not the MAX 9, the 900, has these exact same plugs. There's been no issues with them. Mm-hmm. There's also been no issues in any other aircraft, any other 737-9 MAX aircraft. So I think that this was a one-off thing. I think they're going to be able to find out exactly where the fuselage was made, who put in that door, and what happened. And they're inspecting all those aircraft to see.
Isn't it bad for the brand? Like if you're
it certainly is.
If you're a country or an airline deciding what to buy, doesn't this make you send you in the direction of Airbus just a little bit?
Well, yes, it does. But then there's another thing that people aren't necessarily aware of. If I were to order an aircraft today from Boeing or Airbus, I'm not going to be able to get it delivered for 3 to 5 years. So a lot of times an airline needs the aircraft. You need to buy the aircraft, and you can't really make that decision based on which part of your decision is going to be based on when you can take delivery of it. So there are only two, and this is really kind of frightening in this day and age, only really two large commercial aircraft manufacturers in the world. There's Airbus and there's Boeing. So there's not a lot of choice. There are some smaller commercial aircraft manufacturers, Comac in China, Engber in Brazil, and they make some fine quality products. But for the larger aircraft, there's not a lot of choices. So it does say some things about Boeing. Boeing is, well, currently there's a lawsuit going on against Alaska, but Alaska Airlines is as much of a victim of this as are the passengers. This will end up being passed on to Boeing, and they'll probably be paying for it.
We're speaking with Micah Engber of Airplane Geeks podcast, and let's spend a little time talking about what it must have been like in the plane. It's tough to know how much danger the passengers were in. It's tough to know what it was like for them mentally. It's tough for me to know. We all wonder, how would I react? Now, I know you will say, oh, if it were me, I would know right away that if I hadn't been sucked out immediately, that I would be fine, which is true, because the aircraft is structurally fine. I guess you wouldn't, if you're a passenger, you wouldn't feel that way. But, the outside is whipping by you at probably at that height, 350 miles an hour, something like that. And you're wondering, whoa, what's going on? What was it like in there for them?
The passengers toward the front of the plane probably didn't even know what was happening in the back. They may have heard some noise, and the oxygen masks would have dropped, but they wouldn't have necessarily known what was going on. It would have
Aren't you
been
going to
loud
feel a
for
tremendous difference in A, temperature, and B, pressure? You're going to
Not
go, whoa, your ears would, pop like
Yeah,
crazy.
Not so much in the front. Your ears are going to pop, but there's good news. They were at 16,000 feet. That's relatively low. If they had been at regular cruising altitude, more around 30,000 feet, it would have been much, much worse, and more people would have probably been injured, and more things would have been flying through the cabin. But this was absolutely frightening. There's no doubt that people were terrified of what was going on, because most people don't know anything about aviation and what's happening. But being at 16,000 feet, while yes, the oxygen masks dropped, you were probably going to be okay. Think about it. Pikes Peak is at 14,000 feet.
Yeah.
And people go up to the top there and visit it all the time. You don't need oxygen, although when I was up there, I felt a little dizzy at times, but it's fine. And I've listened to the ATC transcripts. I've listened to them. I heard the pilot talking to ATC. She was in control the whole time. She didn't know why she had a depressurization, but she knew exactly what to do, brought the plane down right away, and then the flight attendants also did a great job of making sure the passengers were doing exactly what they needed to do once everything finally settled down. But everything was being pulled out of the airplane. There's a great pressure difference between ground level and 16,000 feet. So there was somebody sitting in the row ahead of where the door blew out, the door plug blew out, and his shirt got sucked off him, and I think some shoes went out. There were some iPhones that got sucked out and landed on the ground, and they found them, and they were still working. They must have landed in some mud, is my guess, and had a soft landing at 16,000 feet. But as long as you were wearing your seatbelt, there was no danger of you actually being sucked out, and it's a good reason why, if you're in your seat, always wear the seatbelt. Also very lucky that no passengers were standing and walking up and down to the bathroom right in front of where the door plug blew out. But it would have been very loud, it would have gotten cold, and it would have been very frightening as everything was being pulled out that door until the pressure equalized and the pilot brought the plane down to a safer level.
Yeah. It is interesting to note that, well, not this high and not this fast, but paratroopers, they fly with an open door, and the skydive teams, they fly with an open door. So it was kind of like that, only higher and by surprise, higher and faster and by surprise.
Exactly, and I've flown open cockpit. I've been very fortunate to do that a couple of times. Now, granted, only at probably not more than 2,000 to 3,000 feet at that point, because I wasn't on a long flight, but it used to be open cockpit.
Yeah, and at only
all the
90, like 60 to 90 miles an hour, right? Something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't more than but there was a windscreen and things like that, and I was wearing one of those wonderful crazy hats with the goggles, and but once you get up, to a point past. Well, and I'm just going to say, think of B-17 pilots during World War II. They were up at 30,000 feet, but they're wearing electric gloves, and they're wearing oxygen masks, and the windows are open because they're shooting machine guns and things like that. It can be done, but that sudden depressurization, that's where it gets really frightening. It's loud, it's explosive, and everything is being. If somebody was sitting in that actual seat, I mean, we're lucky that nobody got hit and didn't have a concussion from things hitting their head or hitting them as it was going out the door.
Okay, one final question on this. We have a couple other aviation things. I read of an impending lawsuit. People suing for emotional trauma, among maybe something else, but at least that. And, in your experience, a lot of airline incidents and a lot of lawsuits, what are their chances, and how on the hook is Boeing Alaska Airlines, if it's a quality control thing from Boeing? I mean, they have to figure out who's at fault before they start suing, right?
I'm not sure what's going to happen with Alaska Airlines. I can't say that positively whether Alaska Airlines will win or lose that suit. But I can say that if you're really interested in aviation accident litigation, listen to Airplane Geeks episode 777, which, by the way, is a great number for an Airplane Geeks
Oh yeah.
podcast.
How how long back did you do that?
That was in December, not that long ago,
Okay.
really. And our guest was Aaron Applebaum, who was a partner with Kreindler and Kreindler. They're one of the law firms that's handling the Ethiopian 302 crash lawsuit against Boeing. And we talked to her not just about that, but about accident litigation and how you can sue and what requirements are involved. We talk about the Montreal Treaty that's involved that. She was a brilliant guest, a really nice person. We got into a little bit of an argument on the show, but it was a friendly argument about who's responsible for Ethiopian 302. But it was really a wonderful episode, and I learned so much from her. And if you listeners really want to know about how this may go, this would be a good episode to listen to.
So Airplane Geeks. Here, I'll put it up so you can see it. Airplane Geeks podcast.
Airplane Geeks podcast episode 777, and you can go to that directly by going to airplanegeeks.com/777.
Okay. I interview an attorney a lot on all kinds of things, and very consistently, if somebody's going to lose a suit, they have to be proven to have been negligent and done something wrong, or failed to do something right. And if it is, as you say, a Boeing incident, then perhaps I don't see how they can be on the hook. Did they do anything wrong? Did they do anything wrong before, during, or after? I don't know. Are they responsible for checking stuff like that? Are they responsible for going and, knocking on that panel to see if it's solid or anything?
Alaska and all airlines have to do major checks of all the aircraft at certain time periods following all FAA guidelines. This aircraft wasn't due for that, so everything was fine. Now, Alaska also, frankly, I think out of the goodness of their heart, they already, before the lawsuit happened, they offered every passenger $1,500 just to let them know that they're aware of the pain and suffering they went through. That's not a lot of money. I
wonder if they had to sign something to get that $1,500, and if that contained some sort of waiver.
It may have, but not everybody would sign it. And I'm sure Alaska Airlines is going to find themselves in court. But one of the things we speak about is the Montreal Convention when we talk with Aaron Applebaum, and that decides really who is at fault, why, and how. And I really highly recommend that your viewers and listeners listen to that podcast if they want to have some specific information. Right. I mean, your guest on law, I've listened to him many times. He's
Michael
brilliant.
Yeah,
absolutely great. But Aaron's expertise is specifically with aviation litigation, and it was really very handy.
All right, let's turn our attention to a fire.
Yes, this was pretty frightening. It took place, I'm trying to remember the date. It
Not
was
long ago.
January 3rd, a JAL A350 aircraft, one of the newest aircraft in their fleet, and a beautiful Airbus to fly, was landing at Haneda Airport. And as it was landing, there was also a Japanese Coast Guard Dash 8 that's similar to the Q400. It's a Bombardier twin-engine turboprop. It was a Coast Guard aircraft with 5 passengers on board. It was ready to take off and was going to go help. There was just a major earthquake in Japan. They were going to do some earthquake aid. Well, the Japan Coast Guard aircraft was told to hold short of the runway and didn't hold short. And they were on the runway, and it was at night, and the JAL aircraft didn't see them, and they collided upon landing. The JAL aircraft, the Alaska Coast Guard aircraft, the 5 people on board, 4 of them were killed instantly. The pilot suffered serious injuries and went into intensive care. I don't know what happened to him. The Alaska Airlines aircraft had 379 passengers on board. It burst into flames. They could only use 4 of the 8 or 10 doors to evacuate only on one side of the aircraft. Everybody got off safely. And I'm talking about total flames. That aircraft, you can look at find pictures of it, is destroyed. It took them longer than usual to get out because they didn't have all the doors available. And the electrical system was gone. It was dark. They didn't have the PA system. The flight attendants were using megaphones. But every passenger got out safely. None of them grabbed their carry-on luggage, which is probably why this happened. And all 379 passengers and the entire crew evacuated from that aircraft safely.
Wow.
Just amazing. And
why were the doors on only one side available?
The other side was on fire.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons why, upon takeoff and landing, many airlines will ask passengers to make sure their window shades are up, so that in case there's an emergency, the flight attendants can look out and see which side they're going to evacuate from, which doors are going to be open, which slides are going to be deployed. And again, I don't know if this had happened in the U.S. and if it was a U.S. carrier, if everybody would have gotten out safely, because culturally in Japan, oftentimes people will follow the orders of a flight attendant and follow directions. It's just part of the cultural situation over there. In the U.S., people grab carry-ons. You see it all the time. And if people would have had carry-ons, I don't know, doors could have been blocked, aisles could have been blocked, people could have, it would have been a greater disaster. But this just shows that it can be safe.
Yeah, one quick note on a recent flight, I think the most recent flight I had an exit row because I pay extra for the exit row. And during the pre-flight talk about, getting what to do in case of an emergency, he actually came to the people in the exit row and explained exactly how to open the door. No one ever does that. He said, see that thing up there? You pull that down and then you do this and then you do that. No one does that. And I think they should, because no one would really know how to open the door. They don't look at the card, and the cards are not helpful. It's not very explanatory, those cards. And if there's a fire, and you have to almost know how to do that instinctively. You can't be looking at some stupid card. So I would go ahead and recommend that every person that sits in an exit row get a true lesson in how to open the door.
I think that's a very good idea. Now, most times, and I'm sure you've had this before on other airlines, what airline were you flying at the time? Do you remember?
Hold on, Swiss.
Swiss, yeah, very good about that. On almost every airline, a passenger sitting in an exit row will be asked if in an emergency they would be able to act without necessarily being shown how to act. But I think that's a good idea, and they probably told you, or should have told you, not to act unless you're given instructions by the flight attendant to act. Because if you were on the side where the fire was going and you opened that exit door, you would have endangered everybody else, because that fire would have spread inside.
Yeah.
The other thing that in terms of those safety cards, they're not perfect. They certainly aren't. I agree with you. But on Airplane Geeks episode 728, we interviewed a woman named Tricia Ferguson, who's the owner of the Interaction Group. The Interaction Group is the company that designs and creates safety cards for almost every airline in the world. There's a couple of other companies that do it, but Tricia and the Interaction Group designs them for almost everyone. And we talked about the design and what they need to convey and how to do it. And
yeah, you can please register my disapproval of the current design.
Well, I'll be happy to give you Tricia's email, and you could probably have her as a guest yourself, because she's just great and really explained a lot of things. But they need to make it as simple as possible, and they need to make it completely language-free so that it can be understood by somebody on Etihad Airways as easily as it can be understood by somebody on Lufthansa or somebody on American.
Yeah. Are they standardized, or each aircraft is different method. Maybe it would be a good idea to standardize them. I don't know.
Not only is each aircraft different, it's got to be different because each aircraft has different doors that may open differently. It's standardized based on the airline because the airlines need to have different things in there based on what happens or the equipment that they've ordered on that aircraft. And it's different between certain aircraft, even in the same airline, because some aircraft are designed to fly overseas and have extra equipment on it that over water that certain aircraft flying over land would not.
Why don't you tell the folks why? First, I'm going to tell them something that will shock them, and they're going to explain. Folks, no airline has any oxygen aboard. If you feel like there is oxygen, you may be dismayed to hear that. None. Correct. There may be one bottle somewhere, but probably not. But if you think those masks are attached to oxygen bottles, that's not true. Tell them why, Micah.
Well, that is true. Now, first, the flight attendants have moving oxygen and oxygen bottles that they can move with, and there's oxygen for the pilots because they're not necessarily on the system. They may need to be on oxygen longer than what passengers will need. But oxygen is heavy. Oxygen tanks are heavy. So what's in the aircraft are oxygen generators. It's a chemical oxygen generator, and when they tell you to take your mask and pull it down and straighten the tube, but actually what you're doing is you're pulling a pin from that starts the oxygen generator so that you'll be delivered oxygen through your mask. You're not going to hear it flow. It's not really under pressure.
You're not going to feel it flow either. You're not going to feel any breeze.
Flow. No. And it's important, and you've probably seen this in videos taken on TikTok here and there, people putting a mask just over their mouth. And that's not what you want to do. It needs to be over your nose and mouth. They're small and it's tight, but over your nose and mouth so that you're getting the full amount of oxygen.
Yeah, and I heard that some folks said, this is me hearing some folks say, or this is me hearing one person say, that people complained that not all the oxygen masks worked on the Alaska Airlines incident. And I think that, for one thing, in some cases, they probably were working. The people just didn't feel a breeze and didn't think they were working. But maybe they didn't yank on the thing hard enough. You got to pull on it or to activate the chemical reaction.
Exactly. You got to pull it, straighten it out, and
pretty
make sure.
Hard. You got to pull it pretty hard, right?
You definitely got to give it a good yank for sure.
See, people don't know that. This is stuff that you ought to teach this stuff in grade school.
Well, they do say it in the pre-flight. I've always heard them say that, but how many people listen to the pre-flight?
I know, but no one listens to that. It should be
true.
Taught as a kid. What a good lesson. Today we're going to learn about oxygen masks. Something might happen. These masks might come down. You have to do this because of this, and then that kid would remember that forever.
Yeah. And how many people read the safety card? It's also in there, too. I do.
I completely read it and think to myself, well, this is not very descriptive. I'm not, I think this sucks. I try to get it as best I can. We do have a comment. I don't take many comments, but I'll take this one. Bradley, I believe in some of your travel videos you have been seated in this seat and like the legroom. Well, this seat, Will, is our commenter. This was not an exit row. This was a row that in some configurations of the airplane would have been an exit row, but since they didn't need an exit row in this configuration, it had just been plugged up with what is called a plug. And so there wouldn't have been any exit. That would not have been an extra legroom exit seat. But, there are doors, and I do like the exit row. And I have to pay extra for that. And also, a lot of times the exit row is near the bathrooms, and some people don't like being near the bathrooms. But for some reason, I don't mind that. It doesn't smell, and I like those seats.
And that's also part of the real fear that probably was instilled in people is because from the inside, not only was that not an exit row, you wouldn't know there's a door. It looks like the rest of the fuselage. It's upholstered or walled exactly like the rest of the fuselage. You would have no idea that there was a plug there from the inside. And you can only tell from the outside by seeing a small gap between the windows where that window is on the plug. And there's a small gap from the window in front of it and the window behind it. So you can just about see it if you look at a picture at a close-up of a 737 MAX 9. But inside, I'm sure people thought the airplane were falling apart, and for good reason. I know about these things, and you know about these things, and our listeners now know about it. But most travelers, I mean, they don't even know you have to pull on the oxygen mask. How are they going to know that a door plug is there?
It's easy to say that. It's easy to think that you'd be cool and calm and understand everything was fine from the comfort of your home. But even you probably might have a start if that happened. You might go, whoa! You might feel a little tinge of fear, don't you think?
I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. But, but if it happened, the next thing I'd be thinking is, wow, am I going to have a great story for Bradley?
Yeah, it's true. Oh, maybe when you got to the ground. They must have had all kinds of fire equipment on the ground and everything.
Oh yeah, no, but you can find the ATC tapes of the entire conversation between the pilot and ATC, air traffic control, and everybody was so calm and so cool. And the pilot, I can't wait till we can get her on the show and interview her about the experience, because she followed procedures just perfectly. Can't fault them at all.
Final segment of this program here is you were enlisted or chosen to do a sort of promotional and what would you call it?
A review?
Review flight of a new airline. Tell me about that.
Well, Breeze Airways started service in Portland, Maine back in May of last year. And
May I interrupt you for one thing?
Sure.
The name of the airline. It seems like these days people name airlines to reflect a carefree attitude, and not so much a safety attitude. Breeze. It's a breeze to fly us. It's easy. Not like, I'd rather have Wicked Safe Airlines or something like that.
Safe Jets.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, they started service. They're a reasonably new airline that was created by a man named David Nealon. Now, that name may not sound completely familiar to you, but he's the same man that founded JetBlue. He founded an airline that merged with Southwest a few years before that. He founded an airline called Azul in Brazil, and Breeze is just his latest airline. They started service out of Portland, Maine in May with service to Charleston and Tampa and Pittsburgh and Norfolk, and I believe they were flying into Long Island, MacArthur Airport, and anyway, when I was invited for the inaugural celebration for their first flight that was heading down to Tampa, because I'm very fortunate to have a good relationship with the people at the Portland Jetport. While I was there, I interviewed a number of their people, and they said, well, you need to fly with us. I said, okay, I'd be happy to. So in November, I was invited, and I want to make sure that everyone knows they paid for the flight. So my review, while completely honest and open, and Bradley, you know me, I'm going to complain about anything, even if it's free, if I need to complain about it. They paid for everything, but in November, I worked it out with them because I didn't have time beforehand to fly to Tampa, round trip in their Ascent class, which is their first class. Now, Breeze...
Is there a Descent class?
No. Well, Breeze is, a lot of people would call them a ULCC, an ultra-low-cost carrier.
Oh, no.
They bill themselves as an NLCC, a new category, the nice low-cost carrier. And they are. The service, first of all, is incredibly inexpensive. Even if I were paying for it, it would have been a great deal. And they treat you with great respect. They fly all brand new Airbus A220s, which is,
if I may interject, I mean, they know you're the press. Not only is it free, we've covered that. You're still going to be fair, but you're going to get treated extra nicely because you're the press. I know.
Well, they would.
The too.
They would if the pilots and the flight attendants had any idea that I was the press, because they didn't. And I knew for sure that they didn't. And I spoke with their media relations person to make sure that they wouldn't. And indeed, they did not. Now, granted, as I always do, I brought gifts for the flight attendants and the pilots.
Okay.
And I was seated in first class, but I was seated next to other people that didn't bring gifts, and I was seated in front of people that brought their dogs on board, which isn't my favorite thing, but they were perfectly well behaved, and everybody was treated really well.
Okay. When are they operating now? A person could book a flight on that airline now?
Absolutely, they fly out of Portland. I believe they fly out of Hartford. I think they're in Rhode Island, and this again, the service is great. The prices are super. Now they're one of those airlines that will only fly someplace 1 or 2 times a week. They fly to Charleston, a place I want to go, and they fly there, I think, on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I think they go to Tampa on Tuesdays and Sundays. And so, you got to make sure you're ready to stay for that period of time.
Yeah.
If that flight's missed, you're going to have to hope that something else comes up. But again. And by the way, I was in first class, where the seats are a little wider. But what's beautiful about the configuration, in first class, the seats are 2 by 2, 2 seats, an aisle, and 2 seats. But in the back, the seats are 2 by 3, meaning 2 seats, an aisle, and 3. So you got a little more room. And I walked to the back. The plane wasn't completely full, and I sat in the regular economy seats, and yeah, it's definitely a little tighter, but
so what is the seat pitch? What is the leg room in the back? You must know.
I don't have that right in front of me, and I should have looked it up, and that's my
You knew
mistake.
I would ask that because that's the only thing I care about.
Yeah, but I think it's 31 inches, if I remember correctly.
All right.
So, yeah, it's tight, but it's no tighter than Southwest, and the service is equally good or better, and the planes are brand new and just very, very comfortable service.
So what are the
I can't
planes?
say enough about it. They are Airbus A220s. It's a new aircraft. It was created by Bombardier, known as a C Series, but then Boeing sued Bombardier, saying that they were funded by Canada and they shouldn't be able to sell the planes in the USA. So Airbus said, all right, and they bought that aircraft from Bombardier. They assembled them in, I can't remember whether it's Alabama or North Carolina, but they're made in the USA now, and they are now known as the Airbus A220.
So isn't it kind of rare to have Airbuses flying domestically back and forth from U.S. cities, or is that not so
no.
rare?
They fly the Airbus A320 is one of the most popular aircraft in the world as a single aisle aircraft, and they fly it all over. And the Airbus A319, a slightly smaller version of that, is flown all over, as is the Airbus A321, which is a slightly bigger version. And in fact, the A321 ERs are now flying a single aisle from Boston to Amsterdam and to Munich, I believe, and JetBlue flies them there, and they're a great aircraft.
Cool. It must be difficult for a new airline to work their way into the system because there's a lot of things that folks don't think about. Like you have to have room at the gates at the airport. You have to pay, and I'm sure there's a line. I mean, there's not a lot of extra gates hanging around for you to use. You have to either have some pull or wait your turn to get involved at, say, Logan, right?
Well, if you want to really know about that, I'm gonna give the Airplane Geeks another plug.
That's all right.
Airplane Geeks episode 752, when I talk about that inaugural day on May 17th, I interviewed Paul Bradbury, who is the Jetport director, the Portland International Jetport director, and that was one of the questions I asked him. How long did it take, and what do you have to do to get a new airline in here? And he really explained that very, very well.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add? Because I'm good. Breeze, we love Breeze so far. Very lucky in Japan. Well, the people on the Japan airline were lucky. The people on the Coast Guard airplane not lucky. And if a door plug blows off and you have your seatbelt fastened and you're at 16,000 feet, you'd probably be okay.
You may get hit in the head by something flying out the door, but other than that, you should be fine.
Okay. Do you prefer an aisle seat or a window seat?
On Breeze, I flew window, and I just loved it. I got to see New York City by night. I got to see the Chesapeake Bay Tunnel Bridge by night. I got to see the Norfolk Naval Shipyard by night. That's my entertainment. I love to be able to look out a window.
And a related final question: during the day, when you're flying in the day, is, should the default position of the windows be up or down? There are people who want to look out the window. There are people who want to watch a movie. You can't do both. Which is the default?
Here are the rules from my perspective.
From your perspective?
From my
so
perspective.
Made up by you.
No, this is basically what most aviation people will talk about, although there's no rules about it on the aircraft. But the person in the window seat has control of the window. The person in the middle seat gets both arms, and the person in the aisle seat is required to get up anytime some of the other people need to get up and go to the
really? So this is unwritten or written?
It's an unwritten rule, but it's very well known, and that's typically how the flight attendants will enforce it.
Interesting. So the person in the window seat controls the window.
Right.
The person in the middle should get both armrests as sort of compensation for being having that toilet of a seat in the middle. And the person in the aisle has to get up when other people have to use the bathroom, of course.
Right. Yep.
Interesting. Wow.
Probably something that you never really think about, but
no.
There are.
I think this should be also taught in school, because kids should know from an early age. You sit in the middle, you get both armrests. I did not know that. Whoa.
Yeah. Now, when I've sat on the aisle or I've been in the aisle and there's somebody in the window, I've asked them, I said, look, you're next to the window. I like to look out the window. I prefer to have it open. Would it be okay for you to leave it open? And typically, if you ask really nice, they'll say, sure, no problem.
Do you give them chocolates too?
No, I usually don't bring enough chocolates for them. But if they say no, I'll say, okay, thank you.
So Micah does and recommends that you bring some sort of treat for the flight crew to show your appreciation, and not expecting to get anything back, just to show your appreciation. And you never know, they might be extra nice to you back.
Well, look at what happened on JAL. The flight crew did an incredible job. And what I usually say, and I picked this up from my co-host Brian Coleman on the Journey is Reward podcast, I give them the gift and I say, look, I want to thank you for all you do. I'm one of those people that understands, and boy, I hope I can say this. Get ready to hit the beep button. I say, I understand that you're here to save my ass, not kiss it.
I see. Oh, that's very nice. And what do they do?
They usually get a charge out of it. They thank me. A couple of times I've been hugged because they've had a rough day. They just really are very, very grateful because too many people think that they are.
You even get to sit in waiters. You even get to sit in the pilots. You get to go to the cockpit sometimes because you give chocolates and ask.
Either I ask, or if the door's open, I'll peek my head in, and I'll usually have some chocolates in my hand for the pilots too. And I'll say, "Hey, I just want to thank you for flying. I love aviation. Do you mind if I peek my head in?" And sometimes the pilots say, "Don't have a lot of time right now," and that's okay. And other times, the last time I flew to the UK on all my flights, the pilot said, "Oh yeah, come on in here," and the captain got up and said, "Sit in the seat. Put your hands on the throttle. Let me take your picture."
That's pretty coole. I must say, if I were a pilot, I would not accept any food from strangers because people are nuts and who knows what's in there.
That's true.
Should be actually a rule that pilots don't eat any food from strangers because, I don't want to give anybody ideas, but...
It could happen, and I always bring, packages that are sealed and packages that have individually wrapped things inside them. But still, you never know. You're right.
Okay, always a pleasure. Let's do this more often. Thank you very much. It's Micah Engber. What happened to your little thing that says your name? There it is.
There we go.
And also a reminder that if you're into this kind of thing, you've got to sign up for Airplane Geeks podcast. How many episodes now? Like 800?
I think we just recorded 783. And by the way, this week's episode just came out today. We have no guest. We asked our listeners to write in with their favorite aviation film that wasn't Top Gun. And we got a list of 60 films from listeners. We gave away a gift card. I did a piece about my favorite aviation films.
Let me guess.
I listed about 30 of them in there.
Yours is Dr. Strangelove.
It wasn't one that I mentioned in my piece, and it wasn't one that came up. But no, but it's one that I love. It's absolutely great. But my favorite actually is my top two My second favorite is 12 O'Clock High.
Oh, wow.
1949 film with Gregory Peck. But my absolute favorite is The Dawn Patrol, a 1938 film with Errol Flynn, David Niven, and Basil Rathbone. It's just a gorgeous, wonderful film.
Basil Rathbone, what a name.
Yeah, isn't that great?
What's the temperature up there?
Oh, it's
Maine.
not so
You're,
bad.
you're in Maine, Portland area.
I'm in Portland, Maine. It's about 22 degrees.
Oh.
We got the snow cleaned off the car early this morning, took it for a wash, and now the driveway's plowed. So we're in good shape.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon, and thank you very much.
Take care. Have a good one.
All right. And folks, share this. I'm sure you know somebody that would be interested. Think, who would like this? And if so, when you see it on the social media, share it. And don't forget about the Airplane Geeks podcast. Bye, Micah.
Take care.
We'll be on live